Hello and welcome to the Majlis podcast, Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia in Focus newsletter. On March 19th last year, a new president was inaugurated into office in Turkmenistan. That person was Serdar Berdymukhammedov, whose father, Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov, had been the Turkmen president for more than 15 years before stepping aside to allow his son to take over as president. Except Papa Berdymukhammedov never really left Turkmenistan's political scene. In this program, we look at what happened in Turkmenistan during Serdar's first year in power and try to take stock of Turkmenistan's situation now. To discuss all this, I am joined by Aynabat Yaylymova, founder and executive director of Progres Foundation, which works to support various progressive educational initiatives that benefit the public in Turkmenistan, such as saglyk.org, and that is saglyk.org, which has been working to improve public health literacy in Turkmenistan over the past 12 years, including becoming a leading source of COVID information in the Turkmen language. Victoria Clement is a scholar, historian, and author who has traveled widely in Central Asia and has lived in Turkmenistan. Clement is one of the United States' foremost authorities on history, culture, and politics in Turkmenistan and a recognized expert on Central Asia. Her book, Learning to Become Turkmen, Literacy, Language, and Power, 1914 to 2014, was published by the University of Pittsburgh Press in 2018. She runs the consulting firm Central Asia Insights in North Virginia. Thank you both for joining me. And Aynabat, I'm going to start with you. In terms of domestic politics, since Serdar became president, what has changed exactly in the country? Anything that you saw?
Thank you, Bruce. So, overall, Serdar Berdymukhammedov's administration further isolated the country from our observations, both economically, financially, and intellectually. So the data, statistics that is vital for policy making and decision making is still unavailable in Turkmenistan. So the IMF and the World Bank continue excluding Turkmenistan from its reports due to lack of reliable, credible data. The narrative of zero COVID infections and death continue in Turkmenistan, and there are no plans to release the results of 2012 census and the last census that happened in December 2022. So most importantly, no economic reform has been taken to address harmful dual exchange rate of the manat that has devastating impact on the population and business in Turkmenistan, both small and medium-sized business. Strict currency control continues, and we see that Serdar Berdymukhammedov inherited an annual inflation rate of over 50% in 2021, and in 2022 the inflation went down by 11%, but all this is a result of command and control economic measures. The cost of food items remain high, and the black market exchange rate is still 6 times higher than the official exchange rate. So another things that I would like to outline, and then we can come back, is that the government intensified internet shutdowns in 2022 and is trying to build intranet to seal off the population from access to information, modern information, and science. In 2022, there were 4 internet shutdowns registered by independent groups in Turkmenistan. So the internet is very slow, it's very expensive, and it's aggressively censored in Turkmenistan. I can say a few words about travel restrictions that still continue in practice. And it's exacerbated by the fact that thousands of Turkmens outside of Turkmenistan walk around with expired travel passports. And this latest development in September, the government asked Turkey to introduce visa for citizens of Turkmenistan, which really impacted the economic, educational, and job opportunities of Turkmen citizens. And in May 2022, we witnessed big, unprecedented campaign to control and restrict women's and girls' choices in Turkmenistan. So we can talk about it more later. It's really for me, it's a continuation of policies that were put in place before Serdar Berdymukhammedov came into power, because when we look at the access to sexual and reproductive services in Turkmenistan by women has been deteriorating quite for some time. So this all should be viewed as a more should call for more nuanced conversation and understanding how the status of women and girls are changing in Turkmenistan.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to get back to that and look into that in more depth in just a second. But Victoria, I also want to get your impressions about the socioeconomic conditions in Turkmenistan. There was speculation that perhaps once Serdar was elected president, that to gain some public support, he would do something to help people get more access to food. For instance, basically, we know there's lines for bread in a lot of places. That he would do something to help the people out in terms of their personal economies, their standard of living. Did anything like that happen, or is it or stay the same?
Well, thank you for having me, Bruce. Thank you for devoting this session to Turkmenistan as well. I don't think that Serdar or his father, for that matter, have facilitated much change in a positive direction in the lives of the people, socioeconomically speaking. But I do want to qualify one point. Just that you mentioned that people are standing in lines for bread, and my understanding is that there's not so much a food shortage in the country as there is a shortage of state subsidized products. So people are certainly looking for less expensive produce and groceries, and this is what is causing these lines to form, is that they want to shop at the state subsidized stores. So there's not so much a deep hunger in the country, but there is a problem with people getting jobs, and that hasn't been alleviated in recent months. No.
Okay, thank you. And what's overall in the economic situation? You mentioned that the job situation hasn't increased or hasn't improved any. So I'm kind of curious, what in terms of the economy for the average person, have you seen any improvements there? Again, when I look at this, it seems like now the Turkmen people are being charged for anything the government can think of to charge them for. We know that subsidies for water, gas, electricity were dropped finally. Any hint that the situation has been getting better, or are we still seeing the government lean on the people as much as possible to make up for economic shortfalls?
Well, my impression is that things have gotten better since we've gotten over the major part of the pandemic crisis. But I would refer you to Aynabat on this and her Palau Index, which looks at the cost of living in the country. They do a great job of measuring what it costs to get by day to day in Turkmenistan.
Thank you, Victoria, for highlighting that. Yes, so we, as I said, that I mentioned that Serdar Berdymukhammedov inherited an annual inflation rate very high, over 50% in 2021, and the cost of food items, the ones that we track, and the Palau ingredients, 5 of them, show that show the deflation. So the inflation went down, but the starting point, 50%, and it went down by 11. It just sounds like a good news when you look at that, segmented information, fragmented. But if you compare to 2021, it's still problematic. It's problematic. What does it mean? First of all, just following up on a previous question, I'm not sure even the government has measure of poverty in Turkmenistan. So there is this narrative of we have no poverty. It continues. Poverty levels are not measured. And going to your next question about economic situation, there's widening inequality. Even in a given economic situation, the pockets of inequality, city versus rural areas, urban versus rural areas. So we have very limited information. I mean, Turkmenistan is a black box, right? But it's what's happening beyond big cities or like Ashgabat. It's very hard to assess. but we know that there's a flow of migrants continue. Young people continue, searching for better economic opportunities outside of Turkmenistan. And this introduction of visa, we can talk about it, to Turkey, it really hurt the Turkmen public.
And I would just add one thing, Bruce. Overall, and just an overall comment that everything Aynabat says, I agree with completely. There's an untapped human capital in that country. There's an untapped human potential. So even though we have a lot of problems that we're highlighting today, we do see indicators that people want to engage. They do have agency, and they do want to engage their society, their economy, the world. And some of these indicators are things like the American corners being always full with waiting lines for people to get on computers, people paying for schooling, people paying for extra classes after school or after work to learn a foreign language or learn computer skills or accounting skills or some kind of vocational skill. So I see that the people have greater potential than their government is making space for them.
Yeah, this is a really important point, and thank you for raising that. And actually, I want to do a little bit more, keep talking about this for another couple of minutes, because last year I was talking with somebody about the media situation in Turkmenistan, and the government has opened up all these websites that are putting out message reports in different languages besides Turkmen, so in Russian and English, and this person who is outside Turkmenistan but had worked with the media said actually the level of journalism in the country is very, very high. That people have been to these seminars that are done by the OSCE or the United States, and then they've received special training. Unfortunately, they don't have the opportunity. Once they are working as journalists, there is framework they have to work with inside of, and so they can't show how good they really are because there's censors and everything has to be done according to the government's regulations. You haven't seen, since Serdar came in, you haven't seen any attempt to try to tap into the great human capital that's as a resource in that country?
I can just, we know one thing is that not a single news story, not a single story has been published in the state media in 2022 raising the problems, issues that matter for an average Turkmen. So that's a fact. So there is the censorship continues. Yes, I agree with Victoria and with you, Bruce, that the human capital is high, and it's not that we lack skills, but we really have to start asking questions that are going to help Turkmens. First of all, it's this pervasive, paralyzing fear of last 30 years. They are, even on a good day, let's say we turn on the TV and Serdar Berdymukhammedov goes on TV and says, well, just let's imagine this future, right? I know it might be very hard. That says, you can write and speak whatever you want. I'm not going to do anything. Internal services, security service is not going to do anything. It's not going to happen. Turkmens are not going to turn off their TV and they start speaking up their mind. So it's a freedom as psychological process. It is something that needs to be articulated, studied, researched in Turkmenistan, because it's for maybe outsider, it's a fascinating experiment, but for an insider who's, life is ticking, life goes on, it's not a really nice experiment. But for an outsider to see that, cognitive dissonance that Turkmens employ, including journalists, self-censorship, preference falsification, doublethink. This is not going to disappear, even if tomorrow government comes, and makes a statement that that this is over. You can just do whatever you can just say whatever you want, right? So these are very complex processes and I'm glad that we're raising this kind of very important issues.
Well, thanks. Then I want to, because one of the biggest changes that I noticed under Serdar was the treatment of women, And so I want to make sure we give time for that. Victoria, if you don't have anything to add to the previous questions about the socioeconomic condition, I'd like to ask Aynabat then about the changes in the way that they view women. There's all these new restrictions, none of which are written, but everyone understands that there's new government policies as regard women. Can you explain some of what the changes were?
You mean in 2022?
Yeah, after Serdar became president.
Yes. So we saw a lot of reports. If anybody follows Turkmenistan, a lot of reports in international media that the beauty salons were closed. Women could not sit in the driver's seat. All these reports were available for people outside of the country. Inside the country, it was really hard to confirm. For any one person saying that this is truly happening, there will be 5 people saying that this is not happening, because it's just really hard to get to truth, to the situation in the country. But the most important thing is that this happened in 2022, this campaign, and I keep saying that there are no processes, structures to prevent this happening again. So this arbitrary rules, selective application of rules in terms of restricting women's and girls' choices, their way of life, might happen again. So, but I think a lot. How does this work? Why is this happening? Because it's very important to say that Turkmen's ordinary citizen participates in this. We don't know to which level, but the Turkmens themselves participate in this. And my explanation, as of today, if anybody from listeners have other opinion, I would be happy to hear it. Is that so? The domestic life, family life, is the only domain left for Turkmens to do something. To regulate, to innovate, or whatever you call it. And we don't have any laws that are being enforced against domestic violence, for example, sexual violence. The government kind of tells the signals to the men and boys, saying, listen, I will not interfere with your private life, meaning your domestic life. You will have a difficult you will encounter structural violence on a daily basis. It will be hard for you to run a business, to register it, to get a job, or whatever you want. It's like structural violence. But when you come home and you're frustrated, we don't really care what you do in your family, with your children, with your wife, as in terms of what kind of physical, emotional, psychological violence you inflict on other family members. So even I see that the rise that men without knowing it, most of the cases, men and boys are being manipulated by the system. So they just really cling to this story that there's I'm talking about Turkmens here, that there's no violence. There's no violence in Turkmen families. So it's a very, as I said, this is outward manifestations of it, that we can't wear this, we can't wear that, but it's a much deeper, where we have to delve in as researchers and observers. There are much deeper things are happening in Turkmen family dynamics, in the dynamics of the family.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that has been curious for me about this whole process is, of course, that Turkmenistan borders Afghanistan. Now, if the Taliban impose such restrictions, while you might not understand it, at least it would be in keeping with their practice of government. But it seems so strange that Turkmenistan would implement these kind of unwritten rules. And Victoria, do you have any comments on this?
I do. I think it's really important to underscore what Aynabat and you just said, that these are unwritten rules. And because they are not laws and there is no structure putting them in place, and as Aynabat said, there's no structure that will prevent it from occurring in the future. But this is an example, I believe, of another type of event happening in Turkmenistan that is fueled by rumors. It's fueled by what people think the leadership wants. So I spoke to people in Turkmenistan women who said they had absolutely no trouble finding taxis, getting into taxis during this time period that this was being reported on. So it was a very uneven experience among the people. And I think that stems from the fact that it's an unwritten idea, concept, and rule that some people think the leadership might want. And you brought up Afghanistan, and I think I don't want to give the listeners the wrong impression that this has something to do with religion. This has to do with control. Any kind of event we see like this where there are perceptions that there should be restrictions on movement or society, this has to do with a sense of someone needing a sense of control. And it's not a religious question.
Bruce, if I may just add to Victoria's observation, it's just to confirm it, but it's also kind of to look at it from a different perspective. So when you get this kind of conflicting reports, and in whatever happens in Turkmenistan, you're going to have conflicting reports because there is no government agency that steps in and explains what's happening. So it's very important to note that no government agency, no government ministry came out to address this issue. It poured for like 2 months on international media, different reports, different outlets. So there was nobody explained what really happened. There was no government's version explanation of events. That's lacking, and it's just not in this. In any single sphere of life of Turkmenistan is not explained. You do not hear government narrative. And another thing is that really contributing to this situation is there's no education on gender equality in Turkmen language. As we know that the Turkmen population is increasingly the number of people, young people who speak Russian and English, not English, but like mostly Russian, is decreasing. So if you do not speak Russian or English, I'm very sad to report that, for example, on sexuality education, Saglik will be the only, and I'm not exaggerating, the last book was written in 1990s on sexuality in Turkmen. That will be the only source of scientifically correct information. So it's this type of little things contribute to this overwhelming situation we've got now.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. And this is a topic, obviously, we could devote a whole podcast just to women's issues in Turkmenistan, but we do need to get the whole big view of what has happened since Serdar became president. So, Victoria, I'm going to go to you and ask about foreign policy. Have there been any significant shifts in Turkmenistan's foreign policy since Serdar showed up?
Yes and no. Yes, there have been more representatives from Russia visiting Turkmenistan. We also had Serdar and his father both visiting Moscow, meeting with Putin in Moscow. And I say yes because there seems to be a cozying up to Russia. I'm not so sure how much that changes the political scene for the Turkmen people, but what it does seem to affect is this ignoring of alternatives to the West for things like gas export. So there's in addition to going to Moscow, Serdar went to Beijing. So there's a friendliness with Russia that's been warming, and there is a strategic partnership that they're building with Moscow, and there's a closeness to Beijing as well. And as we know, the country is nearly utterly dependent on China for its gas exports. So yes, at the highest level, there have been some new events that have occurred. Mr. Putin awarded Serdar and his father with the Order of Friendship, and he also visited Ashgabat during the year. But does this affect the average Turkmen person? I'm not so sure that it does.
Okay, thanks. And I have a follow-up to that, too. I mean, some people have noted that Russian-Turkmen relations are actually getting much closer, even prior to Serdar becoming president, when his father was president, that in recent years it's been getting closer. And people have suggested that maybe the reason for that is Moscow's support for the Berdymukhammedov clan. Do you see that? Do you think that's the big attraction for Serdar and his father, is that Moscow is giving them guarantees that they will help to keep them in power?
I've heard those rumors as well. I'm not sure that I have any particular insight into what's happening at between Putin and the leadership there. But I will say that I agree with those analysts who say that there has been a deepening of the ties.
Okay, thank you. Any other countries you've seen making inroads, or Turkmenistan reaching out to since Serdar has been in power?
Well, I mean, it's worth noting that the United States sent Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Ambassador Donald Liu, to Ashgabat in last November. And there was an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding signed regarding health and medical services, how that will be implemented, what that will mean for the long term remains to be seen, but at least we did see this a high-level representative from the State Department visiting Ashgabat. He was there for 3 days. He had productive meetings, and he also discussed the launch of an economic resilience initiative in Central Asia to provide funding to bolster trade routes. So the United States has been present and seems to be indicating that it's not willing to cede or utterly cede this area to Russia or China. And the United States has an interest in maintaining that bilateral relation with Turkmenistan.
Great, thank you. And we've reached the halfway point in our discussion, so it is time for me to remind that this is the Majlis podcast, Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty's current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Bruce Pannier, host of the Majlis and author of the weekly Central Asia Focus newsletter. We're talking about Serdar Berdymukhammedov's first year as Turkmenistan's president, and joining me for the discussion are Victoria Clement, a scholar, historian, and author who has traveled widely in Central Asia and lived in Turkmenistan. Victoria is one of the United States' foremost authorities on the history, culture, and politics in Turkmenistan, and a recognized expert on Central Asia. Her book, Learning to Become Turkmen, Literacy, Language, and Power, 1914 to 2014, was published by the University of Pittsburgh Press in 2018. She runs the consulting firm Central Asian Insights in Northern Virginia, and she is the author of a recently published article for The Diplomat entitled The Aura of Governance in Turkmenistan. Aynabat Yaylymova, founder and executive director of Progres Foundation, which works to support various progressive educational initiatives that benefit the public in Turkmenistan, such as saglyk.org, and that is, again, saglyk.org, which has been working to improve public health literacy in Turkmenistan over the last 11 years, including becoming a leading source of COVID-19 information in the Turkmen language. So, Victoria, Serdar, a lot of people thought that really nothing much had changed when Serdar was president during 2022. But at the start of this year, we all kind of got a little bit of a shock when they changed the whole structure of government. And suddenly, although he remained president, Serdar's position doesn't seem so important. Can you explain some of what just happened here with the changes in the structure of government and how that affected Serdar's position?
Sure. Serdar had held the position of president for just about a year when it was announced that the legislature was going to be reformed, and the bicameral legislature was going to be reduced to a unicameral body, so that the Majlis would be the legislature, and a new body named the Halk Maslahati, or the People's Council, would be formed as the supreme and an independent body in the country. And that the Halk Maslahati, although that name had been used before for other bodies, is going to be a new entity with Serdar's father, Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov, at the helm. Now, this new entity has the power to, it intends to have the power to amend the constitution, have control over domestic and foreign policy, and it has within it representatives from all branches of government. So the president, so while Serdar's father, Gurbanguly, is the chair or the head of this body, the new Halk Maslahati, the president is also a member, as well as representatives from the legislature and the judiciary. So we've collapsed the branches of government all into one entity with Serdar's father at the head. So while Serdar remains the president, his father seems to have accumulated the majority of the power in the country.
Thank you. And at the start of the show, I mentioned that Gurbanguly Berdimuhammedov never really left the political scene. Aynabat, you are in contact with people that are from Turkmenistan and some that might even still be in Turkmenistan. Was anyone surprised, or do they even understand the change? Or they just figured Gurbanguly was always the head, so now he's got a different title, but he's still now the leader of the nation and still the head of the country?
Bruce, the Victoria put it all so well together, this latest developments. But when talked to an average Turkmen, both inside and outside the country, they might know about the developments in space, just to give you the kind of a comparison. Then what's happening in the political life, this restructuring changes, So it's a deeply apolitical society. It's not like the whole structure of before was working, or some elements of it to certain limited degrees, and then we face this changes, and it's going to play kind of concern, impact our lives. It's just there's indifference. There is, since the civic life is almost dead in Turkmenistan, so it's this didn't get even much attention. Yes, there were few people, groups of people covering this, but for its relevancy for people inside the country is very minimal. Also, would like to tell you that there are parliamentary elections are happening in March. So again, OSCE, what your office is there right now from news. So the last parliamentary elections that were, in 2018, they were not free. There was no pluralism. It's up there. It's an open access, the information about the OSCE's statements. So it has, in short, it has no, it's not relevant for an average person. People will actually will divert the conversation. They're like, what are you talking about? This has no relevancy for me, and I have no interest in this.
Yeah, I was afraid that might be the situation. Thank you for clarifying that. Victoria, I'm going to come back to you. What does the office of President of Turkmenistan mean now after these changes? Who is Serdar exactly at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, this just happened a few weeks ago, so we're still not 100% sure how this is going to play out on a day-to-day basis. But Serdar still is making trips, state visits, and he's still a representative of the country. But, a couple of things I'll say, and alluding to something that you said at the beginning of the hour, was that Serdar could have been the new young leader who could have modernized the government and improved life. But he didn't make any constructive changes while he was in office, or in his first year in office, I should say. And I think that although this formal resurgence, this codification of the power of Gurbanguly, his father, is recent, it was in the works before this past few weeks. So on one hand, we can say that there's an ease with which we see this dynastic succession being put in place. But in fact, I think this was being planned for a while. And I'm not so sure that Berdymukhammedov father ever intended to step down fully.
Just to follow up real quickly, Gurbanguly was the one that went to the summit, the extraordinary summit of the Organization of Turkic States. Now, admittedly, Turkmenistan is a observer, still has observer status at this point, but the presidents of Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan all went to this. And yet, Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov, the chairman of the Halk Maslahati, and not Serdar Berdymukhammedov, the president of the country, went. Is that a bad sign? No confidence vote?
No, that's a really good point that you make. I think that it implies that Serdar is going to remain a kind of figurehead, so he'll handle some state visits, some meetings, some public appearances, and his father will handle some as well. So perhaps Serdar will handle the more superficial events. That remains unclear at this time, but they've both, since this announcement was made, they have both made visits with foreigners or foreign representatives.
Bruce, if I may add.
Yeah, please.
Yes. So I hear several interesting different things from young people and people inside the country. So I hear this explanation that he will mature. Serdar Berdymukhammedov will mature. It will take some time. Just give him some time. He will mature. Just you guys don't need to talk about it. Don't think about it. I have to tell you that there was a general mood at the very beginning that young people like that Serdar Berdymukhammedov wasn't as flamboyant as his father. So meaning there were less, this mass events or less, it hasn't disappeared, but less applauding, less stage events, so, but it feels like it's coming back, but I cannot quantify it. So I cannot, it's a very subjective feeling. And there are interesting two explanations where I hear that Serdar Berdymukhammedov is uncomfortable the way he projects, his demeanor, uncomfortable with his father's flamboyant behavior, right? But he's doing this because he's a good son. That's a Turkmen narrative family. You don't say no to your father. You don't object. He's just being a good Turkmen son. That's one explanation I hear. And the second is that he increasingly looks like, a young person, a teenager who has to put up with his grandfather from, who lived through Soviet Union. It's through Savok, and he does things that are really, antiquated. It's not, it's not hip, but you have to go with it because it's because of the culture and because of the, because of the family relations and all that stuff. So I keep hearing these things, but it's, of course, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Thank you. And I got to admit, I'm uncomfortable with a lot of Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov's flamboyant behavior too. Some of those videos he made really made me wonder about the person that was leading Turkmenistan. Victoria, I want to ask you a question though too. And I know this is purely subjective, but do you get the impression that Serdar is just uncomfortable being in that position? He never looks very happy in front of the camera. Absolute opposite of his father.
Yeah, I do get that impression. And I wonder if Gurbanguly, the father's new title, national leader, which is being really used as instead of even Arkadag these days. Not that Arkadag is out of fashion completely, but people are being told not to refer to Gurbanguly as the former president, but refer to him as the national leader. So I think that Serdar is probably going to be more comfortable with him taking a larger role.
Okay, thank you. And we'll get to my final question, but I'll give you a chance to make any comments you want to. Is there any reason at all that we should hope to see anything different than what we've seen really since 2007 when Gurbanguly Berdymukhammedov was elected president the first time? Do you see any, I'll start with you, Aynabat, do you see any signs of any changes in the domestic policies or in the lives, the socioeconomic conditions of the Turkmen people coming in the future?
Well, I would like to be hopeful, of course, but not to entertain the false hope, of course. But based on structures what we have right now and narratives, it's least likely that we're going to see big changes. But I would like to clarify here: what changes are we really talking about? economy, yes, it's possible. Easing restrictions on social life, it is possible. Serdar Berdymukhammedov can do that. Yes, I would like to assign an agency to him because in the West I hear that he has zero agency. He can't do that, but I would like to think that he has agency to do that. So also there another factor is that there is some kind of emerging civic activism coming from new generation. The last generation is not perfect. The capacity is low. It will require a lot of investments, but there is some kind of emerging civic activism. And when I say this, it doesn't mean for political change in political system, for more human rights or anything like that. It's not very well formulated, but it's more of focused on economic and social issues, which are much closer to an average person than any other rights. So I think yes, there's a possibility there, but we'll have to hope for the better.
Okay, thank you. And Victoria, kind of the same question, but I'm going to add a little bit to here too. Turkmenistan. You've been watching Turkmenistan for a long time. As mentioned in your bio, you're one of the experts on Turkmenistan. Neutrality used to mean total isolation, but in recent years, even before Serdar became president, there was hints that that's no longer possible to the degree it was 10 or 15 years ago. Do you see Turkmenistan emerging, even if just a little bit, from this isolation that really characterized the country for so long? Are they reaching out more to foreign countries? Paying more attention to ties and partnerships with foreign partners?
I recently looked at the Mejlis website, the legislative branch's website, and I couldn't help but notice there were several mentions of Russian visitors coming into the country, and I felt like it was a little bit, it was being highlighted. And so what I fear is that, yes, there is a bit more interest in ties. They might not be the ties that people in the West are hoping Turkmenistan makes. As far as US goes, there is a new there soon will be a new opening with a hopefully experienced Russian-speaking career diplomat Elizabeth Rude coming in as the new ambassador. She just had her hearing this week, so that's a positive step in that relationship. So do I see, do I think there will be change in the future? I hope there will be positive change, and it's possible, but it's not probable.
Thank you. Like I said, I was just asking because there was a time where Turkmenistan was practically walled off. I mean, nobody got in. And they didn't really reach out to many people outside for any help or advice or anything really. I was just curious what you thought about that. Okay, I'm going to offer you both a chance to make a last comment. Anything I missed that you think is important? Anything that you wanted to say that we didn't get to? And I'll start with you, Victoria.
Well, I'll say that there's a word that has been coined, tandemocracy, with respect to this leadership, and I think that that's going to persist for quite a while, meaning that son and father are going to rule together, and whether this has an effect on the lives of the people in any positive way remains to be seen. We just have to be hopeful for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Aynabat?
I would like also, of course, to stay hopeful, but use this opportunity, Bruce, to call for more discussions on Turkmenistan, more nuanced discussions where we talk about what kind of agency Turkmens have, citizens of Turkmenistan, in their contribution to what's happening in the country right now, and also international community. I know this time we did not talk about it, but it's one of the things that we closely monitoring how the reports and the words by international community match their actions in Turkmenistan, the diplomats and international community actors reports. So I think we need to deepen our understanding of the issues in the country and start asking more nuanced questions to better understand the possibilities. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, and I already marked that down as something as a future topic for the Majlis podcast. I appreciate that. But we have gotten to the end of the broadcast, so I want to thank you, Aynabat, and I want to thank you also, Victoria, for being guests on the show. Excellent comments. Appreciate it very much. And the big thank you, as always, to Nathan Shoemaker, our Majlis podcast producer in Washington, D.C., and a reminder, you can subscribe to the Majlis podcast or the Central Asian Focus newsletter by visiting Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty's website at rfarl.org. Thank you very much, and we'll be back next week. Bye-bye.